With bin Laden's death, Al-Qaeda is decapitated, but it is simultaneously a group, a series of affiliates and an ideology. So does it need the man who founded it to carry on? And could the removal of the world's most wanted promote even more change across the Arab world? The end of Osama bin Laden. This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. Welcome to another special edition of Inside Story, marking the death and analysing the impact of Osama bin Laden. There's no two ways about it. Since 9/11, Al-Qaeda has become a household name, along with that of its founder. And it's grown since then too, with branches in the Arabian Peninsula and North Africa, and acquired franchises, if you like, in Iraq and Somalia. Al-Qaeda has been lifted to a much higher, more influential level than it was 10 years ago. So, what now? Its leader is dead. Does it lose its way or galvanise into an even stronger force? Before introducing our guests, let's just have a look at some important stops in Al-Qaeda's journey. The group's early beginnings were actually in Peshawar in Pakistan back in the 1980s, one of many groups fighting the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. But when the Soviets pulled out, many of those fighters weren't allowed back into their home countries. They were scattered. Bin Laden himself ended up in Sudan, where he allegedly orchestrated attacks in Bosnia, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. The significant move, of course, was the change of headquarters to Afghanistan by the mid-90s. Following that move came the US embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania, the attack on the USS Cole in Yemen, all surpassed in scale and devastation by the attacks on the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon in Washington in 2001. Not to forget the transit bombing of Madrid in 2003 as well. It was events like these which stamped Al-Qaeda into the global psyche, and its offshoots to follow in North Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. So it's a complex group, it's many-layered, it's multifaceted, even a bit disparate. What happens to it now? Let's let our guests answer that, or at least attempt to. In Washington, D.C. is Joshua Fust, who's an analyst at the American Security Project, formerly an analyst at the Defense Intelligence Agency. In Cairo is Dia Rashwan, Deputy Director of the Al-Ahram Center for Political and Strategic Studies. And rounding out our panel in London, Phil Rees, author of the book Dining with Terrorists, Meetings with the World's Most Wanted Militants. Gentlemen, I thank you for your time on what is a very important day and a very big story. Let's start with Dia Rashwan in Cairo. Before we actually look at where Al-Qaeda goes to from here, I wonder your thoughts on where Al-Qaeda was at the time of the death of Osama bin Laden. How influential was he, do you think, prior to his death, just prior to his death?
You know, and everybody knows that Osama bin Laden was the founder of Al-Qaeda, not only Al-Qaeda as an organization, but the idea of what you call global jihad. Osama bin Laden in the end and the mid of 90s, the end of 90s, thought that it's time after the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan to transform his activities and his brothers, the jihadists in this area, to fight in the international level. And from this moment, we saw what we call today the international jihad born. Then Osama bin Laden was the founder. Also, Osama bin Laden became, in the last 10 years at least, the what we can call the supreme guide for all kinds of jihadists, especially global jihadists around the world. Osama bin Laden didn't play in the last few years an organizational role. He stayed only in an isolated place, speaking from time to time, giving some advices, and giving more than advices, giving an inspire for the young and the new recruited people to the global jihad. Then the death of Osama bin Laden today, meaning for those people, especially that he was killed by the hands of his first enemy, the United States of America. It's a real shock. It's a real catastrophe for them. Their leader not only killed, but killed by his first enemy. Then I think that the spirit of the global global jihad now is very down, but it doesn't mean that they will stop their activities.
No.
Everybody now, and many analysts expecting, some revenge. It will be sometimes very strong, but in the middle and in the medium run and in the long run, I think that Al-Qaeda's idea is already, falling down.
Okay. Interesting views from Dia Rashwan there. Let's go to Phil Rees in London to get his view. Dia Rashwan was saying bin Laden was providing advice and inspiration. On a, if I can say this, day-to-day operational level, what do you think he was doing? Was he still handing out orders?
He hasn't done that for, the best part of a decade almost, 7 or 8 years. I mean, I'd accept that his death is highly symbolic, but I think that actually it won't affect the key battles that are taking place. If you look at the movements that are inspired by him, you look at the Taliban, you look at Al-Shabaab in Somalia, you look at Lashkar-e-Taiba, the group involved in the attack on Mumbai a few years ago. These groups will carry on. They've got their grievances. They won't matter that it doesn't matter that he's there because he had no hands-on role. And then you look at how it's splintered. The real sort of influence now comes from groups like Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. You've got a lot of people who speak good English. Adam Gadan, Samir Khan, Anwar al-Awlaki, of course. These people have taken on Al-Qaeda's ideology a stage further. So you've got a whole new generation, the post-9/11 generation. That doesn't mean that his death isn't important from a symbolic point of view, but he'll be regarded as a martyr. And in fact, it may spur people on in that sense. So
I was thinking that word galvanized I used a bit earlier. Joshua Fust in Washington, D.C. We've had two very different views there from our previous two guests. Where do you sit? In between those or either side?
Well, I mean, probably somewhere in between. I think it's important not to undersell the importance of killing off Osama bin Laden. A big part of his appeal and the way that he was able to inspire people to join jihad was through this mythos he had created of being untouchable, of being able to avoid capture or avoid any kind of reprisals from the United States. So the fact that that's happened is actually pretty significant to the rhetoric and the idea of Al-Qaeda as a unifying force. At the same time, it's true that bin Laden didn't play a substantial operational role in global terrorism anymore. He was primarily a figurehead and an inspirational or moral/religious leader of some sort. So I think when you look at individual wars, in particular what's going on inside Pakistan and inside Afghanistan, and even inside Yemen, you're not going to see a substantial change from bin Laden being out of the picture.
On the flip side, though, what does it do to the United States? It's a huge psychological victory for them, I'm sure, a great political capital for President Obama. Does it galvanize the United States to a degree?
I think it will. You're probably going to see much more support for special operations activities, things of that nature. But to me, the really interesting part of this raid is what it reveals about the nature of the relationship between the United States and Pakistan. From everything we've been able to find out so far, the U.S. government didn't inform the Pakistani government that they were going to do this raid until after it already happened. That speaks, I think, to a growing sense of mistrust that has been growing, especially over the last year or so, that was highlighted by the Raymond Davis affair earlier this year. And I think as this continues to play out, the fact that the United States was not actually collaborating with Pakistan to go after terrorists in Pakistani territory is going to be a much more significant story than we're really talking about right now.
Okay, so we've dealt with the number one man, bin Laden, who is now dead. What about the number two, the assumed number two, Ayman al-Zawahiri? Dia Rashwan in Cairo, does he automatically assume the leadership, as it were? And again, as Phil Rees pointed out, bin Laden wasn't handing out the orders. What role would Zawahiri take?
Yes, sure. Logically, Ayman al-Zawahiri will replace Osama bin Laden in the, on the supreme position of Al-Qaeda around the world. Ayman al-Zawahiri is elder than Osama bin Laden, has more experience in the field of jihad than Osama bin Laden, especially the local jihad inside Egypt. And last year we saw Ayman al-Zawahiri playing the role of perhaps operational leader of Al-Qaeda in the area of Afghanistan and Pakistan. Also the spokesman of Al-Qaeda, speaking every, about 1 month to give his idea, to give the idea of Al-Qaeda vis-a-vis different questions around the world. Ayman al-Zawahiri now he is the sole successor for Osama bin Laden. But Ayman al-Zawahiri has not the same characteristics of Osama bin Laden. Historically, Osama bin Laden was respected, was estimated highly by what we call the international jihadists, because his role started in Afghanistan in 1979 by donations, by financial donations, by himself, by recruiting people to fight against the Soviets. It was not the same for Ayman al-Zawahiri. Secondly, also the charisma of the charismatic personality of Osama bin Laden is not the same of Ayman al-Zawahiri. Ayman al-Zawahiri more professional, but less charismatic. And I think also we have, this is perhaps a small detail, but it's important. We had in the last year some problems inside jihadists about the role of Egyptians, inside Al-Qaeda. We have many Egyptians, participated in the foundation of Al-Qaeda with Osama bin Laden, but in the root we have some problems here and there. And we have now a majority of leaders, high leaders or middle leaders of Al-Qaeda came from North Africa, Arab North Africa, not from Egypt.
Just very quickly,
we don't know
Dia,
exactly what will happen.
Just very quickly, because I really want to go back to Phil Rees, but while you've mentioned it, I wonder if Zawahiri is the leader of Al-Qaeda, if becomes the leader of Al-Qaeda, would Egypt disown him in the way that Saudi disowned bin Laden?
No, Zawahiri will replace bin Laden immediately. As this is, I think it's a given. But after this, Zawahiri will not play the same role of bin Laden. He is not really charismatic. He cannot inspire, people. And also his, his regular speaking to the media and to the internet, perhaps didn't give him this ambiguous atmosphere which was around bin Laden. And after that, perhaps we will see some differentiations around the role of Egyptians in general and Ayman al-Zawahiri from their brothers coming from North Africa, especially that many of those leaders playing a very important ideological role than Ayman al-Zawahiri inside Al-Qaeda.
Phil Rees in London, let's bring you back, and maybe you can answer the question with your thoughts about what Egypt might do in the event of Ayman al-Zawahiri being the effective leader.
Well, I think so. I mean, his brother was both released and rearrested in Egypt. Obviously, the Muslim Brotherhood is taking on a political role now in Egypt. But the question of the Egyptians in Al-Qaeda has been a problem since the very beginning. In fact, since, I say the very beginning, since 1989, when Zawahiri really took over the sort of ideological role that he's had there. And in fact, he's been the chief ideologue. I'd say that more than Osama bin Laden. And if you look in recent years, bin Laden's messages are becoming increasingly cryptic. They've perhaps been influenced by people in Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. So, he's had a far more marginal role. Now, of course he had an important role, his almost mystical role, his asceticism, his giving away his wealth. This has been very important to Muslims around the world. But that's still true today. And the manner of his death, actually in a rather sort of brutal way, I think that will only enhance his martyrdom status.
Gentlemen, let's move away from the personalities for a moment. Obviously, it can be difficult given the likes of bin Laden and what a huge figure he was. Well, something I heard today in amongst all the comments was that the Arab awakening, if you like, the events that have happened across the Arab world over the course of 2011 have led to the political end, if you like, of a group like Al-Qaeda. Here you had Arab people rising up using the ideas of democracy and free speech, the American ideals, which bin Laden hated so much. Phil Rees, I'll stay with you. Is that a fair assessment that Al-Qaeda was really hit by the fact that the people of the Middle East wanted to do their own thing?
Ayman Zawahiri has written more than one occasion that public protest will not get rid of the authoritarian leaders of the Middle East. And certainly in some cases he's proved to be wrong there. And I've always maintained that if political space is given to political Islam, and in the past it's been denied. And in fact, that is the father, that is the origin of what the West calls now terrorism, is the fact that Islamists were forced to choose. Either they sort of go to jail in their own countries, or they follow bin Laden's international jihadism. So I think that if there's another option, a middle way, and they have political space, and it inevitably will weaken Al-Qaeda in the long run.
Joshua, in Washington, is it in some sort of convoluted way another victory for the United States in that, as we've been pointing out, democracy and free speech uprisings in the Middle East have rendered Al-Qaeda's view a bit useless?
Well, I'm not sure it's settled yet that we're actually going to see democracy flowering in the Middle East, at least based on what's been happening in Bahrain and in Yemen, and even to an extent in Libya. We don't have a guarantee yet that what's going to happen after these dictators are thrown off is that you're going to get a free and democratic country. One of the challenges to what's been driving the uprisings is that there doesn't seem to be, at least at a national level, any kind of a coherent ideology. That was kind of the appeal that Al-Qaeda brought to a lot of resistance movements, is that it gave a framework and a certain ideological thrust to the arguments that people were using against the regimes. So I think it's true that Al-Qaeda is not served well by these uprisings, and that's a good thing, but I don't think that we can really say that they discredit Al-Qaeda's message.
Okay, let's just pause for a moment, gentlemen. We've looked at personalities, we looked at the region. I want to look more at the groups. We've talked about the likes of, well, Al-Qaeda as a whole, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Taliban obviously features heavily in that as well. And I want you to have a listen to this, which we've heard from Hillary Clinton, commenting on Osama bin Laden's death and making a direct reference to the Taliban. Have a listen.
Our message to the Taliban remains the same, but today, it may have even greater resonance. You cannot wait us out. You cannot defeat us, but you can make the choice to abandon Al-Qaeda and participate in a peaceful political process.
Phil Rees in London, would I be being a little naive to think that the Taliban might listen to that in light of bin Laden's death, or does nothing change?
I don't think that their calculation about how successful they are in Afghanistan, and they are, will particularly change because of that. Obviously, from that first generation of jihadists, many of them have married Pashtun people in that region. They've got bayats, loyalty oaths. So these things are still in place. And the Taliban know that time is on their side. It doesn't matter what Hillary Clinton says. And the US is not winning that war. And if they're not winning it, they're actually losing it when it comes to an insurgency. So I don't think it will have a serious effect on the Taliban, nor on any of the other wars that in a way have been post 9/11 and inspired by the ideas of Osama bin Laden.
And nothing for the US to capitalize on there. If I look at it in the most simple terms, the Taliban was harboring bin Laden, the US went in and threw the Taliban out. Still nothing changes?
Well, obviously, you know, it is a symbolic victory. It kind of caps an era here, but in a way that just reinforces the fact that bin Laden's day was done anyway on the battlefield, as it were. But I can see from a symbolic point of view, and obviously from the victims of 9/11 and other attacks, they can see a kind of closure here. But I think beyond that, I think its significance will not be great. I mean, in my view, the significance of the events today, and we may talk about this, is the relations of the US to Pakistan. That is the most stunning thing that has come out of the events of today, in my view. Not simply the death of bin Laden, but where it happened.
Well, let's put that to Dia Rashwan, seeing as you bring it up. We have addressed it in another edition of Inside Story on Osama bin Laden, I must say. But while we're talking about it, the US-Pakistan relationship, it's really been highlighted by this, hasn't it, Dia?
Yes, Pakistan played a very important role in killing Osama bin Laden, and we saw President Obama today speaking about the role of Pakistani's role, and he's thanking for the Pakistan Prime Minister. And I think that the United States alone could not arrest or kill bin Laden. I think that the main role played by the Pakistanis, and it's clear now in Pakistan that Osama bin Laden represents now the most important figure of Al-Qaeda killed, and we have at least 3 highest leaders of Al-Qaeda arrested already in Pakistan: Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Abu Zubaydah, Ramzi bin Sheba. And it's also clear what kind of role played by the Pakistani security in helping and cooperating with the United States.
I'm going to put it to Phil Rees. Have a listen to this, because I can see him shaking his head there. The idea that the US did not involve Pakistan at all, did they, Phil? They said, we don't want you effectively as part of this. We're going to do this on our own and get it right.
Well, listen, I've been to Abbottabad a few times, Kamal. It's a couple of hours out of Islamabad. It's a leafy area. It's full of the dachas, the mansions of generals. It's a military town. I mean, it's got the equivalent of West Point or Sandhurst there. It's a big military atonement. I mean, how possibly could these people not know that bin Laden was there, or at least parts of the Pakistan security services? And if that is the case, I mean, this is the most remarkable double dealing that we've seen. It is unbelievable. Everybody knows that the ISI was involved in the Taliban, with elements within the Taliban playing them, because their military doctrine actually seeks to have a Taliban role there. And I wonder, how on earth was this guy under their noses and not knowing about it? I mean, I don't believe that he's in plain sight. And I think that that is the real story that, you know, I'm fascinated with. It needs to come out.
One more issue I want to deal with, just as we do start to run the clock, and we can bring Joshua Fust back in, seeing as you are there in Washington, D.C., to look at an American perspective. I'm sure you've seen, Joshua, as we have the celebrations out on the street in Washington and New York as well. Right. The fear of reprisals, though, that must hang over things right now. In the immediate future, the idea that Al-Qaeda, any of its affiliates, that the Taliban, that any of these groups that we talk about in the region will take exception to this.
Yeah, earlier today, the State Department announced that all of their diplomatic outposts, and then also most, if not all, military outposts were increasing their threat readiness level. So the government is definitely being on the lookout for some kind of reprisal attacks. What's going to be interesting to see about this, though, is that there were already a number of operations already in place, in particular within Pakistan, where the security situation can be pretty fragile, but also in other places, particularly in North Africa, and then also around some of the conflict areas in Yemen and maybe some other places. So unless there's a spectacular attack somewhere outside of the Middle East, I think it might actually be pretty difficult to tell whether this is just another pre-planned attack anyways, or if it's something that's specifically meant to be revenge for bin Laden's killing.
Dear Rashwan, what do you think? Do you expect there to be anything? And can we, as Joshua says, can we differentiate to what would be, if I can say, a regular attack versus a bin Laden death-inspired attack?
After the death of bin Laden, of sure, will inspire many Islamists around the world to try to make revenge. And I expect in the very short run, very strong operations, especially against American sites, American targets. And also, I think that we can see in this, anarchist situation in the Middle East, because of the revolutions in Yemen, in Egypt, in Tunisia, also to see inside this atmosphere also some operations against Western targets. But in the middle run, Al-Qaeda's idea is falling down now, not only because of the death of bin Laden, but most important because of the replacement of the Arabic very high massive revolutions in the place of Al-Qaeda, a small group, violent group idea. Now we have the time of revolutions, not the time of changing regimes by force and by very small groups according to the theory of Al-Qaeda. I think that objectively, Osama bin Laden died in the good time. Because Al-Qaeda's idea is died now, and I think it's in the route to die after the high, rank, high level, high, scale revolution in the Middle East. We have now another theory, to make face to the dictatorship, to make face to the corruption, but not the way of Al-Qaeda, but of the coup d'etat. Okay. Then I think that it's a good time for bin Laden to die now.
Okay, dear, thank you for that. Final thought, 30 seconds left for Phil Rees to wrap up for us. I talked about Al-Qaeda at the start of this as multi-layered, multifaceted, disparate, all these things. How would you describe it as a group now? Can you even describe it as a group?
No, it's primarily an idea, but there is a new doctrine that emerged 2 years ago. It was asking Muslims individually to attack the West, those who felt angry about Western foreign policy. We saw it with the bomb over Detroit 2 years ago. We saw it the Fort Hood incident. This has happened recently, that individuals take initiative in their own hands. That was the new doctrine. In terms of the Middle East, I'll just say, if the West doesn't involve itself and the Middle East evolves according to its own dynamics, yes, then Al-Qaeda will not have a rationale, because their doctrine is about the distant enemy, about Western involvement in Muslim lands. And if that ceases, certainly Al-Qaeda will have no reason to exist.
What an interesting discussion, gentlemen. 10 years in the making, I might even say. Thank you to all our guests. Joshua Fust in Washington, D.C., Dia Rashwan in Cairo, Phil Rees in London. Thank you. This has been a special edition of Inside Story, one of two looking at the death, the life and the impact of Osama bin Laden, part of continuing coverage here on Al Jazeera with comprehensive global reaction to this news. I'm Kamal Santamaria. Thanks for being with us here on Inside Story. We'll see you again soon. The news on Al Jazeera is next.